Mr. Daybell, all of those penalties could run consecutively, one after the other, or they could run concurrently at the same time. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Chad Daybell wants his case separated from his wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, and his attorney claims not only do they have a different defense, but a different version of the facts. What does this really mean in the case of the Doomsday cult duo? I'll be joined by podcast host Gigi McKelvey, who knows all the ins and outs of this story. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
He was just so angry, like super scary.
Did you
know how you take your phone away from like a 16-year-old and they freak out? Like their world disintegrates. Like I've taken my phone away from a 16-year-old boy before, and he's like wanted to kill himself because like they kidnapped him. That's how it was. It was like it's something on his phone that he does not want me to see. That he was like freaking out.
For anyone who watches the Law&Crime Network, you know that we have been actively following the bizarre and horrifying case of Lori Vallow Daybell and her husband, Chad Daybell, out of Idaho. Now, they have been labeled as the Doomsday cult duo in this very complicated story. So I'm going to give you a little bit of idea of what's happening here. The couple are facing multiple charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the deaths of Lori's children from her previous marriage, 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, as well as Chad's former wife, Tammy Daybell. Now, starting off with the kids, both kids disappeared on separate dates in September 2019, but the remains were discovered in shallow graves on Chad's property in summer 2020. As for Tammy, she died in 2019, and what was originally thought to be natural causes, she died in her sleep. Investigators took a second look, thought that there was something suspicious going on, did an autopsy, a further examination, and now they believe Chad is the one who killed her. Now, I also have to mention Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Very important figure in all this, because Alex Cox is an unindicted co-conspirator who died in December 2019 of what authorities called a blood clot. Not only do investigators believe that he was involved with what happened to the kids, but he shot and killed Lori's previous husband, Charles Vallow, in July 2019 while claiming self-defense. And though he will never face any charges, Lori is actually charged with conspiracy down in Arizona where this took place. I should also tell you that Alex Cox is also accused of trying to kill Tammy several days before Chad allegedly carried out the act.
Charles was following Lori and yelling, and Tylee told him to get back. She took her bat like that and shoved him, and then he took the bat away. And I said, "What are you doing?" And I got between them, and then he hit me, and I just went down, and when I got up, he was still yelling. And so I went into the bedroom where I was staying and grabbed my gun. I came back.
Okay.
And told him to put the gun down, or the bat down. And he came to me and was saying, what are you going to do? Like that, and come to me with the bat.
With so many deaths surrounding the couple, I do have to add on top of the fact that it's been reported that they have these closely held religious beliefs that many say are very, very odd, and many suspect that that may have been a motivation for these alleged murders. So this is kind of a basic framework of what we're dealing with and who the couple are in the story, who, by the way, I should tell you, their legal cases are joined together and the death penalty is currently on the table. But now, what is happening is so interesting because Chad's defense team has wanted his case severed from Lori's for a while, but now says that they are putting forward a version of events that are different from Lori's, and they have a very different defense. Well, let's talk a little bit about this. I'm joined right now by someone who knows this case arguably better than anyone else. I'm joined by Gigi McKelvey, the host of Pretty Lies and Alibis podcast. Gigi, it's great to see you again, and thanks for coming here on Sidebar.
I appreciate you having me on, Jesse.
Let's talk about it. So John Pryor, who represents Chad Daybell, he made an argument to Judge Stephen Boyce, and he said, quote, "Our version of the facts of this case will differ greatly from what Ms. Vallow and her legal counsel are going to be presenting. Our defense is diametrically different than Ms. Vallow's, and the cases need to be separated." What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me the honeymoon's over, Jesse. I think Chad is going solo in his defense and leaving Lori behind.
Okay, walk me through how that's possible. Is it the idea he didn't know what she was up to? Is it the idea that the bodies of these children were found on his property and maybe he didn't know about it? You know the inner workings of the relationship between these two, right? They were joined at the hip. So now that they're presenting kind of different defenses, or according to John Pryor, they're going to be different defenses. What's going on?
Well, his kids gave an interview, I believe last year, where essentially they said he had no clue the kids were on his property, which is very hard to believe. You have Alex there the morning after these kids were murdered, and you're telling me that he didn't know Alex was there burying two bodies. I guess the only way he's going to do this is to play oblivious. That's the only thing I can think. Otherwise, I don't see where he has any defense at all.
Well, I'm going to bring something else up. I mentioned that there's this conspiracy to commit murder charge in Arizona for the death of Charles Vallow. And John Pryor says that he plans to use information from that case during his defense arguments for Chad. He said, quote, "There was a documentary done by Netflix," the documentary that he's referring to is Sins of Our Mother, "that portrayed this case in a way I don't necessarily agree with. They talked about the allegations of what Miss Vallow was allegedly involved in down in Arizona. I am going to be petitioning the court to allow me to use a certain amount of information as it relates to Arizona." What's he talking about?
Well, we know that they did not indict Chad in the conspiracy to commit murder for Charles down in Arizona. So they just said there was not enough evidence to ensure a conviction. So I'm thinking maybe they're going to pull some of these text messages that were released by Chandler when they were finished and handed this over for charges, because there really was very little participation that we saw from Chad in those text messages. It seemed to be more between Lori and Alex. So I think the
When you
fact,
say the text messages, can you explain what they mean?
well, there's a lot of back and forth between Lori and Alex in the days leading up to when Charles was coming into town to visit JJ. So we know afterwards, Chad made a few comments that were not very nice, but leading up to the murders, it seemed to be that the communication was mainly between Lori and Alex, and Chad was absent from those.
What is the relationship, or what was the relationship between Chad and Alex, right? We know that Alex and Lori have a close relationship, unindicted co-conspirator, he believed to be a part of everything. What about the relationship between Alex and Chad?
We don't really know as much about their relationship, but I do think that it's going to be a theme there, because when the welfare check happened in Rexburg, Chad and Alex were together when authorities first came onto the property to talk to them about JJ's whereabouts. And I remember at one point in the report, they said that when asked, "Where is JJ?" Alex looked at Chad. So, and then Lori referred to Chad as Alex's friend, even though at the time that was her husband. So I think that it's just going to be that Alex sort of seemed like a tag along to me. He kind of believed everything that Lori and Chad peddled to him. So I think they're going to throw it all on Lori and Alex. It's the only way they really have any kind of a defense at this point. But yeah, so the relationship between Alex and Chad hasn't been really revealed in depth so far. But I mean, he was part of the three musketeers, I guess you could say. I mean, he was always there in the middle of the two of them. So I think we're going to find that they were all in regular contact about all this.
You and I have been following the case, so there's a part of it where our viewers and our listeners might be not understanding what the dynamic is here, because it is a surprise, right? It's a surprise that Chad would turn on Lori, right? I think we have to amplify that. Wasn't there a part where he was visiting her, because she was actually arrested before him? He was visiting her in jail all the time. Weren't they still trying to communicate with each other when they were both behind bars? So the idea that he would now turn on her, is that not a surprise to you?
It is in a way, because you have to remember these two people thought they had been married on other planets and other dimensions or whatever it is they think. And so for a long time, people thought there's no way these two will separate. But you get death penalty on the table. And he's had a couple of years to sit in a cell by himself, away from her, away from whatever he felt from her. And I think now it's his life on the line. So the only choice he has is to formulate a very different defense than Lori's, which is going to be throw her under the bus. You're never going to be back in Hawaii to celebrate your anniversary. You're both going to be in prison for the rest of your life. I think it's the only way Chad can really try to spare his own life at this point.
He actually waived his right to a speedy trial. Okay. And Lori has had a complicated situation. She hasn't waived it. Her case is on hold until there's a mental competency evaluation that can be determined, because the issue of mental competency with Lori Vallow Daybell has been kind of up in the air. She's not quite fit to stand trial at this point. What does that tell you? Does it seem that he feels pretty confident in his case? I mean, does he feel pretty confident in where he's going here?
I think, he's wanted this severance. John Pryor has filed for this several times in the past and been denied every time. But I think we're going to get to a point to where it maybe organically separates, because she can't stay competent long enough to make it to trial. We've already had that January date vacated. Now it's going to be fall of next year. So I think, Lori's making it easy on him to get that separate trial by himself to give his own defense.
And by the way, a legal point of view here. So it's not so easy to sever a case. You have the time, the expense of duplicative trials. You'd have to ask, is there going to be unfair prejudice to one defendant if you try them together? And also, I should mention that, as Fremont County prosecuting attorney Lindsay Blake explained, they could have an easy alternative here. Well, maybe not easy is the right word, but one thing they can do is have two juries, one trial, one jury for Lori, one jury for Chad. And if there's evidence that comes in that one jury shouldn't hear, the other jury actually leaves the room. The jury hears the evidence. The other jury comes back in. We've seen it happen before. They could necessarily do that. So, I mean, I guess the question is, do you think that the case against Chad is maybe weaker than the case against Lori? Or do you think that this is really a situation where they're both in it, they're going to be tried together, and they're, equal accomplices in what happened?
I think they're equal. I mean, what we've seen just from the Chandler document dump, these guys were not smart in how they hid things. They communicated regularly over text messages, emails, that kind of thing. I think there's way more evidence that Rexburg has that we haven't seen yet that will shock us. So I think the fact that they just did not hide their crimes very well. You have Chad on audio calling the mortuary where Charles Vallow's body is, saying that he's Chad Daybell. I mean, really, they're not complex characters. So I really do think they've slipped up. They've got the goods up there. I don't think you get death on the table for coincidences or something that seems this way or that way. I think they've got the goods. These two are going down. It's just, can we keep Lori competent enough for them to go down together in a courtroom at the same time?
Well, they are innocent until proven guilty, and it'll be interesting to see if we have this trial, when it'll happen. And there's been reports that we're probably not going to actually see it, that no cameras will be allowed. So that would be a disappointment. Again, Gigi McKelvey, thank you. Gigi McKelvey, thank you so much for taking the time. The host of the Pretty Lies and Alibis podcast. Gigi, tell everybody where they can find you.
I'm on all major podcast platforms, YouTube, and just Facebook, all the social media outlets. Love to have you join us, and we have fun, but we keep it classy and try to be a voice for the victims and the families, the living victims that are left to deal with these messes that people like Lori and Chad allegedly create.
And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.